I am Caitlin Mitchell, 32, and I never expected to see my parents standing on my doorstep after 2 years of silence. The shock froze me in place as they smiled awkwardly, eyes darting repeatedly to the Porsche in my driveway. They had ignored my wedding invitations, forgotten my birthday, and missed every milestone in between. But now they were suddenly eager to reconnect, complimenting my successful life and asking about my job. The hollow feeling in my chest grew as they pretended the past never happened. In that moment, I realized they weren't there for me. They were there for what I could give them. Now I had to decide what to do next. If you have ever had family members who only remember you exist when you have something they want, give this video a like. I know I can't be the only one whose parents suddenly became interested in my life when they saw signs of financial success. Subscribe to hear more family drama stories like mine, and let me know in the comments if you would have slammed the door in their faces or done what I did. Trust me, the ending of this story will make you rethink what family really means. Growing up in a middle-class neighborhood in Boston, I always knew something was different about how my parents treated me compared to my sister Heather. Our family home was modest but comfortable, a colonial-style house with 4 bedrooms that somehow still never felt like there was enough space for me. My father, Douglas Mitchell, worked as a mid-level manager at an insurance company, and my mother, Emma, stayed home until we were in high school, then took a part-time job at a local department store. From the outside, we looked like the perfect family. Inside our home was a different story. From my earliest memories, Heather was the golden child. 3 years younger than me, she seemed to receive praise for simply existing while I was constantly trying to earn a fraction of the attention my parents lavished on her. When Heather brought home a C on a test, my parents would take her for ice cream to cheer her up. When I brought home straight, as my father would glance at my report card and ask why I hadn't joined more extracurriculars to round out my college applications. "You need to try harder, Caitlin," he would say, barely looking up from his newspaper. "Colleges want well-rounded students, not just good grades." Meanwhile, Heather would be praised for her natural social skills when she spent weekends at the mall with friends instead of studying. The pattern continued throughout my childhood. When I won first place in the state science fair in 8th grade, my parents skipped the ceremony because Heather had a soccer game. When I graduated high school as valedictorian, they complained about having to sit through the boring speeches and left before the reception to take Heather shopping for her junior prom dress. "Your sister needs us more right now," my mother explained, when I asked why they couldn't stay to meet my teachers. "You understand, right? You're the responsible one." Being the responsible one meant I was expected to achieve everything on my own, while Heather received endless support. The family photo album told the story clearer than words ever could. Page after page of Heather at dance recitals, Heather blowing out birthday candles, Heather posing with my parents at Disney World. The rare photos that included me were often ones where I had been asked to take the picture and then someone else had briefly held the camera to capture a shot with me in it, usually standing awkwardly at the edge of the frame. "Caitlin, take another one. Your sister blinked" was a phrase I heard at every family gathering. After a while, I stopped asking someone to take a picture with me included. The financial disparity became impossible to ignore when we reached college age. My parents had apparently been saving for Heather's education since she was born. For me, they offered to co-sign a loan. "We just didn't have as much when you were younger," my father explained, though his salary had been steadily increasing throughout my childhood. "Besides, you can handle student loans. You're smart with money." I overheard him on the phone with a relative once saying, "Family supports those who deserve it." The implication was clear: Heather deserved support. I was expected to fend for myself. My determination to succeed despite their lack of support became the driving force in my life. While Heather attended a private university with our parents paying her tuition, rent, and spending money, I worked 2 jobs while attending state school on a partial scholarship. Every achievement felt like a personal victory against the narrative my parents had created, where I was less worthy of love and support than my sister. The wedge between Heather and me grew wider with each passing year. She wasn't malicious about being the favorite, she just accepted it as normal. In her mind, she deserved everything she received and I deserved less. We drifted apart as she embraced the role of golden child, and I focused on building a future that wouldn't require my parents' approval. "You're always so serious," Heather would complain on the rare occasions we spoke. "Not everything is a competition." But in our family, everything had been a competition, and it had been rigged from the start. By the time I finished high school, I had stopped hoping for my parents' recognition. I had learned that depending on them for emotional support was like expecting water from a stone. Instead, I focused on what I could control: my education, my career, and building relationships with people who valued me for who I was, not what I could achieve or provide. The day I left for college was the first time I felt truly free. As the bus pulled away from my neighborhood, I watched my childhood home disappear in the distance. My mother had given me a quick, distracted hug before returning to help Heather prepare for her junior year homecoming dance. My father had been too busy watching a football game to come outside. That moment crystallized everything I needed to know about my place in their hearts. I promised myself that someday I would build a life so complete that their absence would be nothing but a footnote in my story. My college years at Massachusetts State University were a blur of classes, work shifts, and stolen moments of sleep. While other students were joining clubs and going to parties, I was juggling a morning job at the campus coffee shop and evening shifts at the university library. Between those, I squeezed in computer science classes and programming projects that often kept me up until 3 a.m. My tiny dorm room became my sanctuary, the first space that was truly mine. During my sophomore year, I took an advanced algorithms class with Professor Rachel Carter, a brilliant woman who had worked in Silicon Valley before turning to academia. After I aced her notoriously difficult midterm, she asked me to stay after class. "You have a natural talent for this," she said, reviewing my solutions. "Have you considered applying for internships at tech companies?" No one had ever mentored me before. The feeling of having someone actually see my potential was so foreign that I almost cried in her office. Professor Carter became the guide I never had, recommending books, reviewing my projects, and eventually writing a glowing recommendation letter for a competitive internship program. It was in her class that I also met Mark Williams. Tall, with perpetually disheveled dark hair and a quiet intelligence that matched my own, Mark was the first person who seemed to understand me completely. Our relationship began as study partners, evolved into friendship, and by junior year had blossomed into love. Unlike my family, Mark never compared me to anyone else or found me lacking. He simply appreciated me for exactly who I was. "You know you're extraordinary, right?" he would say, watching me debug code late into the night. I never knew how to respond to compliments like that. They felt like messages from a parallel universe where I was valued just for being myself. When I landed an internship at Tech Fusion, a rising company in the industry, I called my parents hoping for at least a token congratulation. My father answered the phone. "That's nice," he said distractedly after I shared my news. "Did you hear Heather made the dean's list this semester?" "That's great," I replied automatically. About my internship, though, it's really competitive. Only about 20 students nationwide get selected. "Well, just make sure you don't get too caught up in all that computer stuff," he said. "It's not really a secure career path. Your sister is studying business administration, you know. That's where the real opportunities are." By this point, I should have known better than to expect enthusiasm. Still, the familiar sting of dismissal followed me as I hung up the phone. Mark found me staring blankly at my laptop screen an hour later. "Let me guess. They weren't impressed," he said, gently sitting beside me. "Apparently I'm just playing with computers while Heather's building a real career." I laughed, trying to hide the hurt. Mark took my hand. Then they have no idea what they're talking about. You're going to change the technology landscape someday, and they'll be too blind to see it until everyone else does. The internship proved to be my turning point. During those 3 summer months, I developed an optimization algorithm that caught the attention of the company's senior leadership. What had started as a small project to improve internal data processing became a proprietary technology that TechFusion would later integrate into their core products. By the end of the summer, they offered me a full-time position upon graduation with a starting salary that was higher than what my father made after 30 years at his company. When I graduated college, my parents attended the ceremony, but spent most of the time talking about Heather's upcoming graduation the following year. At the family dinner afterward, my mother asked if I would be moving back home until I found something permanent. Actually, I already have a job, I told them. At TechFusion, where I did my internship. I'm moving to California next month. California, my father frowned. That's awfully far away. How will you afford to live there? Those tech startups can go under overnight, you know. It's not a startup, Dad. And they're paying me $80,000 to start. The silence that followed was the first time I had ever rendered my father speechless. His expression flickered between disbelief, calculation, and something that looked almost like resentment. Well, he finally said, I guess all that computer stuff worked out. 3 years into my career at TechFusion, I received an unexpected opportunity. A small startup called Nexus Systems was looking for a lead developer for their cloud computing division. The salary was comparable to what I was making, but they offered something more valuable: equity in the company. The position would mean taking a risk, leaving the security of an established company for the uncertainty of a startup with big ideas but limited funding. I called my parents to discuss the opportunity, something I rarely did anymore. Our phone conversations had dwindled to obligatory holiday calls and brief updates, usually ending with news about Heather's latest accomplishment. You're thinking of leaving a good job for some unknown company? My father asked incredulously. That's the most irresponsible thing I've ever heard. They have a solid business plan and innovative technology, I tried to explain. And equity means I could really benefit if they succeed. Or be left with nothing when they fail, he countered. Caitlin, for once in your life, stop trying to prove something and make a sensible decision. Despite their discouragement, I took the job at Nexus. Mark supported my decision completely, having recently started his own position at a gaming company in San Francisco. We moved in together, creating a home filled with the warmth and encouragement I had never experienced growing up. My phone calls with my parents grew even less frequent, usually initiated by me, and ending quickly when they inevitably steered the conversation toward Heather's new job at a marketing firm my father had connections with. Your sister is really climbing the ladder, my mother would say proudly. Her boss thinks she has executive potential. I would murmur appropriate congratulations while omitting that I was now leading a team of 15 developers, or that our product was revolutionizing how businesses manage their cloud infrastructure. Somehow I still couldn't bring myself to compete with Heather in their eyes. It felt pointless, like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom. As the months passed, Nexus Systems began to attract attention in the industry. Our technology was solving problems that larger companies had struggled with for years, and investors were taking notice. My team expanded, my responsibilities grew, and for the first time, I felt truly valued for my contributions. My parents remained oblivious to my success, and gradually, I stopped expecting them to care. The need for their approval, once a driving force in my life, had faded into a dull ache that only occasionally made itself known. In its place grew a sense of self-worth, built on real accomplishments and relationships with people who genuinely cared about me. Mark, Rachel, who had become a close friend and mentor, my colleagues, and the small circle of friends we had cultivated in California, became my chosen family. They celebrated my victories, supported me through challenges, and never once made me feel like I was competing for their affection. For the first time in my life, I was thriving, not despite my family, but because I had created a life beyond the limitations they had set for me. I was no longer Caitlin Mitchell, the less favored daughter, but Caitlin Mitchell, respected technologist and creator. It was in this space of newfound confidence and self-assurance that Mark would soon ask me to become his wife, setting in motion a series of events that would finally force me to confront the reality of my relationship with my parents. Mark proposed on a foggy evening at Land's End in San Francisco. We had hiked to a cliffside overlook, and though the famous Golden Gate Bridge view was obscured by mist, the moment couldn't have been more perfect. He had carried a small blue box in his pocket, waiting for the right moment, and when he dropped to one knee, time seemed to stand still. "Caitlin Mitchell," he said, his voice steady despite his shaking hands. "You are the most brilliant, determined, and loving person I have ever known. Will you marry me?" I said yes through tears, and as he slipped the ring on my finger, I felt a sense of certainty I had never experienced before. This was what unconditional love felt like. This was what I deserved. The drive home was filled with excited plans and phone calls to friends. When we reached our apartment, champagne and flowers were waiting, arranged by Mark's parents, who had been in on the surprise. Their genuine joy for our happiness made the moment even more special. When the initial excitement settled, I knew I needed to call my parents despite the knot of anxiety forming in my stomach. "Mom, I have some news," I said when she answered. "Mark and I are engaged." "Oh," she paused, and I could hear the television in the background. "Well, that's nice. When are you thinking of having the wedding?" No congratulations, no excitement, just a practical question delivered in the same tone she might use to ask about the weather. "We haven't set a date yet. We just got engaged a few hours ago." "Well, don't wait too long. You know your sister has been seeing someone from her office, a vice president, very successful. They've only been dating 6 months, but I wouldn't be surprised if they get engaged soon too." And there it was. In less than 30 seconds, my engagement had been acknowledged, and the conversation redirected to Heather. I ended the call shortly after, promising to keep them updated on wedding plans. Mark found me staring at my phone, a familiar mixture of disappointment and resignation washing over me. "They're not excited, are they?" he asked softly. I shook my head. "My mom spent more time talking about Heather's boyfriend than our engagement." Mark pulled me into a hug. "Their loss, not ours. We're going to have an amazing wedding surrounded by people who truly care about us." His words became my mantra over the following months as we planned our ceremony. When my mother suggested Heather should be my maid of honor since she's your only sister, I gently explained that my friend Jamie, who had been my emotional support through college and beyond, would be standing beside me. "But it's tradition to have your sister," my mother protested. "What will people think?" "Which people, Mom?" I asked. "The relatives who can barely tell Heather and me apart because they see me so rarely, or your friends who have heard everything about Heather's accomplishments and nothing about mine?" The silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes. 2 months into planning, Mark's parents invited us to dinner to discuss their contribution to the wedding. They insisted on paying for the rehearsal dinner and offered a generous gift toward the ceremony and reception. Their thoughtfulness brought me to tears. "We're so happy Mark found you," his mother said, squeezing my hand. "We couldn't ask for a better daughter-in-law." The contrast with my own parents was stark and painful. When my father called the next day to discuss the wedding budget, his first question was whether we could keep costs reasonable. "We need to be fair," he explained. "We have to consider Heather's wedding someday too." "Mark and I are paying for most of it ourselves," I informed him. "His parents are covering the rehearsal dinner." "Well, we can't let them show us up," he replied, missing the point entirely. "We should at least match their contribution." It wasn't about supporting us or celebrating our marriage. It was about appearances, about not seeming less generous than the Williams family. The realization settled heavily in my chest. We decided on a relatively small ceremony at a beautiful venue overlooking the Pacific Ocean. With about 70 guests, mostly friends from college and work along with extended family, it felt intimate yet celebratory. We set the date for October 15th, giving everyone 8 months' notice to make travel arrangements. I mailed my parents formal invitations with the rest of our guest list, even though I had already told them the date over the phone. Something inside me still hoped that the official invitation, embossed with silver lettering and tied with a blue silk ribbon, would make it real for them. Perhaps seeing their names elegantly printed on the envelope would spark some parental instinct of pride or joy. Their response came 2 weeks later, not in the form of the enclosed RSVP card but through a brief phone call from my mother. "About your wedding date," she began, her tone already telling me what was coming. "We need to check if we can make it. Heather's college roommate Amanda is getting married that same month, and we already committed to attending." "The invitations went out months ago, Mom," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I told you the date before we even booked the venue." "Well, we can't be expected to remember every date you mention," she replied defensively, "and Amanda's parents have been friends with us for years." The implications were clear. A family, friend's, daughter's wedding took precedence over her own daughter's. I ended the call with a tight throat, promising to touch base closer to the date. Mark found me curled up on our bed, invitation samples scattered around me. "They might not come," I whispered as he gathered me in his arms. "They're considering skipping our wedding for Heather's roommates." Mark's face hardened, a rare display of anger from my usually calm fiancé. "Then they don't deserve to be there," he said firmly. "Anyone who doesn't celebrate you doesn't belong at our wedding." As the weeks passed, my parents drifted into vague responses when I asked if they would attend. "We're still trying to work it out," my father would say. "These schedule conflicts are tricky." 2 months before the wedding, they called with their decision. I was in the middle of a meeting when my phone lit up with my mother's name, and I excused myself to answer, heart-pounding with hope. "Caitlin, we've looked at everything and we just can't make it work," she said without preamble. "Amanda's wedding is in Connecticut, and trying to fly cross-country twice in 1 month is too much. You understand, right?" I stood in the hallway outside my office phone, pressed to my ear, as the last thread of hope snapped. "Could you change your date?" my mother suggested, as if rescheduling a wedding planned months in advance was as simple as moving a lunch appointment. "No, Mom, I can't change the date," I replied, surprised by the calmness in my voice. "The venue is booked, deposits are paid, and guests have made travel arrangements." "Well, these things happen," she sighed, as if the situation was beyond anyone's control, rather than a direct result of their choices. "I'm sure it'll be lovely anyway." That night, I had the final conversation with my parents about the wedding. I called them together, Mark sitting supportively beside me as I put the phone on speaker. "I want to be clear about something," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "I understand that you've chosen to attend Amanda's wedding instead of mine. That's your decision. But I need you to understand that this isn't a scheduling conflict or bad timing. This is a choice you're making about what matters to you." "Now, Caitlin," my father began, using the patronizing tone he had perfected over the years, "you're being dramatic. Sometimes adults have competing commitments." "Yes, and adults prioritize those commitments based on what's most important to them," I countered. "You've made your priorities clear. I just wanted you to know that I hear what you're telling me, even if you're not saying it directly." There was a long silence before my mother spoke. "We love you, Caitlin. We just can't be everywhere at once." "I know where you can be and where you choose to be," I replied quietly. "I won't be calling again about the wedding. If you change your minds, your invitations have all the details." I hung up, feeling a strange mixture of grief and liberation. The fantasy of having parents who would prioritize me had finally been laid to rest. In its place was the cold reality that they would never be the parents I needed, but also the warm certainty that I had built a life filled with people who truly cared. Mark's parents called the next day, having heard about my parents' decision from Mark. His mother's voice was filled with the righteous indignation that my own mother should have felt on my behalf. "We would be honored to stand in for your parents at the wedding," she said. "If you'd like, Richard would be proud to walk you down the aisle." I accepted through tears, grateful for their unwavering support, and the reminder that family is about how people treat you, not just shared DNA. As the wedding approached, I gradually stopped checking my phone for messages from my parents, and focused instead on the celebration ahead and the family we were creating together. October 15th dawned with the kind of perfect weather that photographers dream about: golden California sunlight filtering through a light marine layer that promised to burn off by midday. I woke up in a hotel suite, surrounded by my bridesmaids, Jamie checking the final details, while my college roommate Sophia laid out the makeup and hair supplies. Despite the joy buzzing around me, a part of me still held out hope for a last-minute miracle, a text or call from my parents saying they had changed their minds and were on their way. "Your phone keeps lighting up," Jamie said, handing it to me. "Mark's mom checking if you need anything, your boss sending congratulations, and Rachel saying she's on her way." No messages from my parents. No missed calls. Just silence. "They're really not coming, are they?" I said quietly, more a statement than a question. Jamie sat beside me, taking my hands in hers. "Their loss, not yours. Today is about you and Mark, and the beautiful life you're building. Focus on that." She was right, of course. Throughout the morning preparations, I concentrated on the excitement of marrying the man who had shown me what unconditional love felt like, on the friends who had become family, and on the future that stretched brightly ahead of us. Still, as I stepped into my wedding dress, I couldn't help feeling their absence like a physical ache. The ceremony venue overlooked the Pacific Ocean waves crashing against the cliffs below, as white chairs were arranged in neat rows, facing an altar adorned with blue and white flowers. 2 chairs in the front row, reserved with small family of the bride signs, remained conspicuously empty, as guests found their seats. Mark's father Richard met me in the small waiting area adjacent to the ceremony space. Distinguished with silver hair and the same kind eyes as his son, he looked at me with a warmth that made my throat tighten. "You look absolutely beautiful, Caitlin," he said. "I know this isn't how you imagined today, but I want you to know how proud we are to have you joining our family. Thank you for doing this." I managed careful not to cry and ruin the makeup that had taken an hour to perfect. "It means everything to me." "The honor is mine," he replied, offering his arm. "Mark is the luckiest man alive, and we couldn't ask for a better daughter-in-law." The music began, and with a deep breath I stepped into the aisle on Richard's arm. The guests rose, smiling faces turned toward me, but my eyes found only Mark, standing tall and handsome at the altar, looking at me as if I were the most precious thing in the world. In that moment, the empty chairs didn't matter. The parents who couldn't be bothered to attend their daughter's wedding faded from my thoughts. What remained was the love surrounding me, tangible and real, from the man waiting to become my husband, and the chosen family who had shown up not just for the celebration, but for all the moments that had led to it. The ceremony was everything I had hoped for, intimate and personal, with vows we had written ourselves. Mark promised to always see me for who I truly was, to celebrate my successes as his own, and to create a home where I would never doubt my worth. I promised to cherish his gentle spirit, to stand by him through whatever challenges we faced, and to remind him daily of the joy he had brought into my life. "By the power vested in me by the state of California," the officiant said, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." As Mark kissed me, applause erupted from our gathered loved ones, and for a perfect moment everything felt right with the world. The reception that followed was filled with laughter, dancing, and heartfelt speeches. Rachel, my mentor turned friend, took the microphone during dinner for what would have traditionally been the father of the bride's speech. I first met Caitlin when she was a sophomore in college. She began, her voice steady and warm. Even then, I knew she was extraordinary. Not just because of her brilliant mind, though that certainly caught my attention, but because of her determination and resilience. Caitlin has never taken the easy path or waited for things to be handed to her. She has worked for everything she has achieved, and she has done it with grace and integrity that inspire everyone around her. She raised her glass toward me, her eyes shining with pride. To Caitlin and Mark, may you build a life together filled with the love and support you both so richly deserve. The words she didn't say hung in the air between us, acknowledgement of the parents who should have been there to speak those words themselves. Yet in their absence, Rachel had given me something perhaps more valuable, recognition, not just of who I was as a bride, but of my journey to this moment. Throughout the evening, I found myself checking my phone during quiet moments, a habit I couldn't seem to break. No messages, no calls, not even a text wishing me well on my wedding day. I put the phone away after the third check, determined not to let their absence overshadow the celebration. The following morning, as Mark and I prepared to leave for our honeymoon in Hawaii, my phone finally rang with Heather's name on the screen. I answered with mixed emotions, part hope and part wariness. "Caitlin, I'm so sorry I couldn't be there," she said, her voice bright and completely lacking self-awareness. Amanda's wedding was yesterday too, and since Mom and Dad were already going, I know I cut in, not wanting to rehash the excuses. "Did you call for something specific? We're about to board our flight." "Oh right, congratulations. I just wanted to say that Mom and Dad feel really bad. They wanted to be there, but you know how it is with their commitments and everything." I closed my eyes, processing the layers of fiction in that statement. Do they feel bad, I mean? Because they haven't called or texted? Well, you know how they are with technology, Heather laughed nervously. Anyway, they said to tell you congratulations from all of us. They hadn't even reached out directly. Instead, they had delegated the obligatory well wishes to Heather, treating my wedding like an afterthought, a missed lunch date that required only the most perfunctory acknowledgement. "Thanks for calling, Heather. I have to go now." As I hung up, Mark squeezed my hand. "You okay?" I looked at my new husband, at the life we were beginning together, and made a decision that had been forming in my heart since the moment my parents chose someone else's wedding over mine. "I'm done," I said quietly. "I'm done chasing their approval, or waiting for them to suddenly become the parents I needed. From now on, I focus on the family we're creating, and the people who actually show up for us." The relief that washed over me was unexpected but welcome. As we boarded the plane for our honeymoon, I left behind not just my single life but also the burden of unmet expectations I had carried for as long as I could remember. The family I had been born into might never fully accept or appreciate me, but the family I had chosen, and the one Mark and I would build together, would be founded on something stronger than obligation, genuine love, and mutual respect. Just as we began to taxi down the runway, a text message appeared on my phone from my father. "Hope you had a nice ceremony. Call when you get back." No congratulations, no acknowledgement that he had missed one of the most important days of my life, just a casual message that could have been sent to a distant acquaintance. I turned off my phone, leaned back in my seat, and let the plane carry me toward the future I deserved. I know many of you have experienced family disappointment too. Have you ever had to create boundaries with family members who only valued you when you had something to offer them? Drop a comment below and let me know how you handled it. Your experience might help someone else dealing with the same issues. Now let's continue with what happened next in this family drama. The year after our wedding marked a turning point in both my career and my relationship with my family. Mark and I settled into married life with an ease that confirmed we had made the right choice. Our modest but comfortable home in the Bay Area became our sanctuary, a place where we both felt completely accepted and valued. At Nexus Systems, things were accelerating faster than anyone had anticipated. Our cloud infrastructure solution had caught the attention of several major tech companies struggling with similar challenges. What had started as a small startup with ambitious ideas had grown into a serious contender in the industry. My team had expanded to 25 developers across 3 continents, and I had been promoted to Chief Technology Officer, overseeing all product development. The real game changer came 9 months after our wedding. On a seemingly ordinary Tuesday, our CEO called an emergency all-hands meeting. As we gathered in the main conference room, the tension was palpable. Startup life had taught us that unexpected meetings usually meant one of 2 things: either we were running out of money, or something big was happening. "I wanted you all to hear this directly from me," Michael, our CEO, began. "After 6 months of negotiations, I've accepted an acquisition offer from Quantum Technologies." A ripple of surprised murmurs spread through the room. Quantum was one of the largest tech companies in the world. The deal values Nexus at $1.2 billion. Michael continued over the growing buzz. "Everyone here has equity, which means everyone here will benefit from this acquisition." My mind raced to calculate what this meant. Like most startup employees, a significant portion of my compensation had been in stock options. I had been with the company almost from the beginning, with a substantial equity package that had seemed like monopoly money at the time. Now those digital numbers on an equity statement were about to transform into very real wealth. When I got home that evening, I could barely contain the news until Mark arrived. "We did it," I blurted, the moment he walked through the door. "Quantum is acquiring Nexus, our stock options. Mark, we're going to be millionaires." He froze, briefcase still in hand. "Millionaires, as in multiple millions?" I nodded, the reality still sinking in for me as well. Based on my equity percentage and the acquisition price, somewhere around $4 million after taxes. Mark set down his briefcase and pulled me into a tight embrace. "Caitlin, that's incredible. You've worked so hard for this." "We worked for this," I corrected him. "All those nights you brought dinner to the office when I was working late, all the weekends you understood when I had to fix critical issues. This is our success." The following months were a whirlwind of transition. The acquisition was finalized, the stock options converted to cash in our bank account, and suddenly financial concerns that had shadowed us since college simply evaporated. We paid off our remaining student loans, set aside funds for retirement, and began considering real estate in areas we had previously only dreamed about. I also started therapy, finally addressing the family dynamics that had shaped so much of my life. Dr. Sarah Bennett specialized in family trauma, and under her guidance, I began to understand that my parents' treatment hadn't been my fault. The golden child and scapegoat roles Heather and I had been assigned were common in dysfunctional families, and my achievements or lack thereof had never been the real issue. "Your success triggered their insecurity," Dr. Bennett explained during one session. "Some parents need to believe they're more successful, more intelligent, or more capable than their children. When you began to surpass them, especially in financial terms, it threatened their self-image. But they were so supportive of my sister," I pointed out. "Because supporting her reinforced their view of themselves as good parents, while her accomplishments never threatened to overshadow theirs. Your ambition and determination made them uncomfortable, because those traits held up a mirror to their own limited achievements." These insights helped me understand, but didn't erase the pain. We continued to have occasional surface-level contact, mostly initiated by me. They never asked about my work beyond vague questions that indicated no real interest or understanding. I had stopped expecting them to celebrate my successes, but the sting of their indifference had dulled to a distant ache that only occasionally made itself known. About 8 months after the acquisition, I made what some might consider an indulgent purchase. The Porsche 911 Carrera S had caught my eye at a charity auction, sleek and powerful in a deep midnight blue. At $135,000, it represented a tiny fraction of our net worth, and yet I hesitated, years of financial caution difficult to overcome. "You should get it," Mark encouraged. "You've earned it not just financially, but symbolically. It's okay to celebrate your success." The moment I took delivery of the car, something shifted inside me. It wasn't about the status symbol, or even the joy of driving something so beautifully engineered. It was about acknowledging my own worth, about allowing myself to want and have nice things, without guilt or justification. The car became a tangible reminder that I had built a life beyond what anyone, including myself, had imagined possible. Meanwhile, through occasional updates from Heather, I learned that my parents' financial situation had deteriorated. My father had been laid off during a corporate restructuring, a casualty of changing technology and his own refusal to adapt. At 58, he was struggling to find comparable employment in an industry that increasingly valued digital literacy over traditional experience. My mother had taken on more hours at the department store, but their lifestyle had always stretched their means, and the adjustment was proving difficult. Heather, too, was facing challenges. Her meteoric rise through the marketing firm had stalled, and she had recently gone through a messy divorce from the vice president my mother had been so impressed by. She had begun calling me more frequently, our conversations gradually shifting from her usual self-centered updates to genuine questions about my life and work. "I saw an article about Nexus being acquired," she mentioned during one call. "That must have been exciting for your company." "It was," I replied cautiously, unaccustomed to her showing interest in my career. "I was actually part of the acquisition team that negotiated the deal." "Wow, Caitlin, that's really impressive." There was a new note in her voice, something like genuine admiration. "You always were the smart one." The comment, so at odds with the family narrative we had grown up with, caught me off guard. "Thanks, Heather. That's nice of you to say." "I'm not just saying it," she insisted. "I think I always knew it, even when Mom and Dad, well, you know how they are." It was the closest she had ever come to acknowledging the disparity in how we had been treated. Not quite an apology, but perhaps a first step toward something like understanding. As the months passed, my professional reputation continued to grow. The magazine, Technology Innovators, featured me in a profile titled "The Hidden Architect of Modern Cloud Computing," highlighting my contributions to the technology that had made Nexus an acquisition target. I was invited to speak at industry conferences, consulted on complex integration projects, and began mentoring younger women entering the tech field. Through it all, Mark remained my steadfast partner, proud of my accomplishments without ever feeling threatened by them. We had moved to a beautiful home in an exclusive neighborhood with space for the family we hoped to start and the careers we continued to build. Financial security had given us freedom to make choices based on what would bring us fulfillment rather than what would pay the bills. The contrast with my childhood couldn't have been more stark. Where once I had been the afterthought, the less favored daughter expected to fend for herself, I was now surrounded by people who valued my contributions and celebrated my successes. The validation I had spent years seeking from my parents had come instead from mentors, colleagues, friends, and most importantly, from within myself. I had stopped checking my phone for messages from my parents after each new achievement. I had stopped hoping for their approval or understanding. In therapy, I was learning to parent my own inner child, to give myself the recognition and unconditional love they had withheld. It was a healing process, slow but steady, like recovering from a long illness. Then, on an otherwise ordinary Saturday morning, the doorbell rang. Mark had gone out for a run, leaving me enjoying a rare, quiet moment with coffee and a book. I wasn't expecting anyone, and as I approached the door, I had no idea that the moment of reckoning I'd both feared and longed for was about to arrive. I opened the front door to find my parents standing awkwardly on my doorstep, looking like strangers in a familiar disguise. My father's hair had grayed significantly since I'd last seen him, and my mother seemed smaller somehow, her carefully applied makeup not quite concealing the new lines around her eyes. For a moment, we all froze. The surreal nature of their appearance after 2 years of near silence, rendering us momentarily speechless. "Caitlin," my mother finally said, stepping forward for a stiff hug that I returned on autopilot. "You look well. What are you doing here?" The question came out more bluntly than I'd intended, but the shock of seeing them had bypassed my usual filters. "We were in the area," my father replied vaguely, his eyes sliding past me to take in the marble foyer and the glimpse of our living room beyond. "Thought we'd stop by and see how you're doing." "In the area." "From Boston." "On my doorstep in California without warning." The explanation was so transparent that I almost laughed. "Come in," I said, instead, stepping back to allow them entry. As they moved past me, I noticed my father's lingering glance toward the driveway where my Porsche was parked. "That's quite a car," he commented with forced casualness. "Must have cost a pretty penny." And there it was, the real reason for their sudden appearance. Not concern for my well-being or a desire to repair our relationship, but curiosity about my financial situation and what it might mean for them. "It did," I replied simply, as I led them into the living room. "Can I get you something to drink?" "Coffee, water." "Coffee would be lovely," my mother said, perching on the edge of our sectional sofa, as if afraid to fully commit to sitting in our home. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in the high ceilings, the original artwork, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay. "You have a beautiful house." I escaped to the kitchen, grateful for the moment to collect myself. My hands trembled slightly as I prepared the coffee, the unexpected confrontation with my past, leaving me feeling oddly vulnerable despite all the work I'd done in therapy. When I returned with a tray, my father was examining the awards displayed on our bookshelf. "Chief Technology Officer," he read from one plaque. Impressive title. "What exactly does that entail?" The question might have seemed like genuine interest from anyone else. From him, it felt like reconnaissance. "I oversee all technology development and implementation for Quantum's cloud division," I explained, setting down the tray. "After they acquired Nexus, I was appointed to lead the integration and expansion of our platform." "Sounds important," he nodded clearly, not understanding or particularly caring about the details. "Must pay well." My mother shot him a warning glance before turning to me with a practiced smile. "We've missed you, Caitlin. It's been too long since we've been together as a family." The statement hung in the air between us, its hypocrisy so blatant that I couldn't immediately formulate a response. 2 years of silence, a missed wedding, forgotten birthdays, and now they had missed me. I was saved from having to reply by the sound of the front door opening as Mark returned from his run. He stepped into the living room, sweaty, and surprised, his protective instincts visibly kicking in as he registered who our unexpected guests were. "Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell," he said coolly, moving to stand beside me. "This is unexpected." "Mark," my mother greeted him with the same artificial warmth she had directed at me. "How nice to see you. We were just telling Caitlin how much we've missed her." "Interesting timing," he replied, his hand finding mine in a gesture of solidarity that nearly brought tears to my eyes. My father cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Well, we've been meaning to visit for some time. Life gets busy, you know how it is." "I do know," Mark said, his tone making it clear that he found their excuse lacking. "So busy you couldn't make it to our wedding." An awkward silence descended, broken only when I squeezed Mark's hand in silent thanks for his defense of me. "That was unfortunate," my mother finally said. "We had a prior commitment that couldn't be changed." To Heather's roommate's wedding I supplied, unable to keep the hurt from my voice despite my best efforts. "How was it?" My parents exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the direct confrontation. "It was lovely," my mother managed, "though I'm sure yours was beautiful as well." "It was," Mark confirmed. "Everyone who mattered to us was there." The implication hung in the air, causing my mother to flinch slightly and my father's jaw to tighten. Before the tension could build further, I decided to cut to the chase. So what brings you to California? It's a long way to come without calling first. My father shifted in his seat, abandoning the pretense of a casual visit. Well, to be honest, Caitlin, we've had a bit of a setback. My position at the company was eliminated in a restructuring 6 months ago. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and part of me genuinely was. Regardless of our complicated relationship, I didn't wish unemployment on anyone. The job market isn't what it used to be, he continued, a note of bitterness creeping into his voice. Companies today want younger workers who understand all this new technology. They don't value experience like they used to. It's been difficult, my mother added. We've had to make some significant adjustments to our lifestyle. I waited, sensing there was more coming, the real purpose behind their cross-country journey. Your father has found a new position, my mother continued, but the salary is considerably less than what he was making before, and with the housing market the way it is, we're underwater on the mortgage. I see, I said carefully, beginning to understand exactly where this conversation was heading. That must be challenging. The thing is, my father said, leaning forward with what he probably thought was a persuasive expression, family should support each other during tough times. We've always believed that. The irony of his statement was so profound that I had to stifle a laugh. Had we been watching the same family history, had he forgotten his own mantra about family supporting those who deserve it? We were hoping, my mother interjected, perhaps sensing my skepticism, that given your success, you might be in a position to help us through this rough patch. A family loan, just until we get back on our feet. And there it was, the real reason for their sudden appearance at my doorstep, after years of indifference. Not to reconcile, not to apologize for missing my wedding, not even to genuinely reconnect. They had come because they needed money, and they had remembered they had a daughter who apparently had some to spare. How much are you talking about? I asked, my voice steady, despite the emotions churning inside me. My father named a figure that by coincidence or calculation matched almost exactly the price of my Porsche. The car they had noticed immediately upon arrival, the visible symbol of wealth that had apparently reminded them of my existence. That's a substantial amount, Mark observed, his hand still firmly in mine. Well, family is worth investing in, my father replied, with a forced smile. And I'm sure it's a drop in the bucket for you now, with your fancy job and all. Before I could formulate a response, my phone rang with Heather's name flashing on the screen. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Excuse me, I said, stepping into the kitchen to answer. Heather. Hey Caitlin, my sister's voice came through, unusually hesitant. Are Mom and Dad there yet? The final piece clicked into place. You knew they were coming. A pause. They mentioned they might stop by while they were in California. And the loan they're asking for, did you know about that too? Another, longer pause. They're struggling, Caitlin. Dad lost his job and they're having trouble making the mortgage payments. They're talking about having to sell the house where they raised their favorite daughter. I couldn't help pointing out the old hurt bubbling to the surface despite my best efforts. That's not fair, Heather protested weakly, but we both knew it was exactly fair. Why didn't they call first, Heather? Why show up unannounced? They were afraid you'd say no without hearing them out, she admitted. And they saw an article about you in some technology magazine. It mentioned the acquisition, and they thought you might be in a position to help. Translation: they had realized I had money, and they wanted some of it. Not because they cared about me, not because they wanted to repair our relationship, but because they saw me as a potential solution to their financial problems. I have to go, I said, ending the call and returning to the living room where my parents waited expectantly. Looking at them now, I could see them clearly for perhaps the first time. Not as the all-powerful arbiters of worth I had viewed them as throughout my childhood, not as the parents whose approval I had desperately sought, but as flawed, fallible human beings, who had made their choices just as I had made mine. The realization was both liberating and profoundly sad. I think it's time we had an honest conversation, I said, sitting down across from them. About the past, the present, and what happens next. As I sat across from my parents in the living room, I shared with Mark years of unspoken truths hovered between us. The expensive furniture they were perched on, the awards displayed on our shelves, the view of the bay through floor-to-ceiling windows, all of it seemed to have captured their attention more than I ever had. My father's eyes kept drifting to a sculpture we had purchased from a local artist, mentally calculating its value, no doubt. Before we discuss any loan, I began carefully, I think we need to address some things that have gone unsaid for far too long. My mother shifted uncomfortably. Caitlin dear, this isn't really the time for dredging up old grievances. We're here because family should support each other, and right now we need that support. Funny how the concept of family support only seems to matter when you need something from me, I replied, surprised by my own calmness. Where was that family support when I was working 2 jobs to put myself through college, or when I was building my career without a single word of encouragement from either of you, or most recently when I got married without my parents present? My father frowned, defensive as always. We explained about the wedding. We had a prior commitment that couldn't be changed. To Heather's roommate's wedding, Mark interjected. Someone you barely knew versus your own daughter. Amanda's parents have been our friends for years, my mother insisted, avoiding eye contact. We couldn't just cancel at the last minute. The last minute, I echoed in disbelief. I told you the date 10 months in advance. I sent formal invitations 8 months before the wedding. You had plenty of time to make arrangements, but you chose not to. My father's expression hardened. You've always been so dramatic, Caitlin, making everything into such a big production. Expecting my parents at my wedding isn't being dramatic, I said, my voice steady despite the familiar twist of pain. It's a basic expectation that most daughters would have. Well, we're here now, my mother interjected with forced brightness. Let's focus on the present, shall we? Your father was explaining our situation. Yes, let's talk about the present, I agreed, leaning forward. Let's talk about how after 2 years of almost no contact, you show up unannounced at my doorstep the moment you need money. Not to apologize for missing my wedding, not because you missed me or wanted to repair our relationship, but because you saw an article about the acquisition and figured I'd become your personal bank. The silence that followed was heavy with uncomfortable truth. My father was the first to break it. That car in your driveway, he said, with a hint of judgment, that shows where your priorities are. Spending over $100,000 on a sports car while your family struggles. I actually laughed at that, a short, incredulous sound. My priorities? You want to talk about priorities? How about choosing to attend a roommate's wedding over your daughter's? How about paying for Heather's entire college education while telling me to take out loans, because I'm good with money? How about never once calling to congratulate me on any professional achievement, no matter how significant? We've always supported you, my mother protested weakly. No, I corrected her, you've always supported Heather. I was left to support myself. And look how well that turned out, my father countered, gesturing around our home. You learned to be independent, to stand on your own feet. Clearly, it worked out for the best. I stared at him, stunned by his attempt to reframe their neglect as some sort of character-building exercise. So now you're taking credit for my success, claiming your absence from my life was actually a gift. I'm just saying that, sometimes tough love is the best approach, he insisted. Heather always needed more guidance, more support. You were always the capable one. That isn't love, tough or otherwise, Mark said, his voice tight with controlled anger. That's neglect, repackaged as a parenting strategy. My father turned to him with a scowl. This is a family matter. I don't think you have any place to comment on how we raised our daughters. Has my husband, I cut in firmly, has more family to me than you've been in years. And unlike you, he was actually at our wedding. My phone lit up again, with a text this time from Heather. Are they still there? What did you decide about the loan? The coordinated effort was so transparent it was almost insulting. I set the phone down without responding. "How much do you need exactly?" I asked, looking directly at my father. Hope flashed across his face. 135,000 would cover the outstanding mortgage balance and give us a cushion until my new salary kicks in. The exact price of my Porsche. The coincidence seemed too precise to be accidental. Had they researched the cost of the car and calibrated their need accordingly? The thought made my stomach turn. "And if I gave you this money," I continued, watching their expressions carefully, "what would change between us? Would you suddenly remember my birthday, start calling to check on me, take an interest in my life beyond what I could provide financially?" My mother reached for my hand, a gesture that felt rehearsed rather than genuine. "Caitlin, we're family. Of course, we'd stay in touch more. Like you did after my wedding, or after the acquisition that was featured in the magazine you read." She withdrew, her hand flustered. "You're being unfair. Communication goes both ways, you know. You could have called us more often too." "I did," I said quietly. "For years I called. I visited. I sent invitations and updates and tried to be part of your lives. Eventually I stopped because it became clear that unless I was talking about Heather, you weren't really interested in what I had to say." "That's simply not true," my father insisted, though his eyes slid away from mine as he spoke. "We're proud of what you've accomplished." "Are you?" I challenged. "Because this is the first time you've ever said those words to me. In 32 years you've never once told me you were proud of me." My mother began to tear up, a response that once would have made me backtrack, apologize, do anything to avoid causing her distress. Now I recognized it for what it was: emotional manipulation designed to shift focus away from their behavior and onto my supposed cruelty for naming it. "We're your parents," she said through her tears. "Of course we love you. How can you doubt that?" "Love is demonstrated through actions," I replied, holding firm despite the familiar guilt beginning to surface. "And your actions have consistently shown that I matter less to you than Heather, less than your friends, children, less than your social obligations. Now suddenly I'm important because I have something you need." At that moment, my phone rang again, this time with a video call from Heather. The orchestration was becoming almost comical in its transparency. I answered and put it on speaker. "Caitlin," her face appeared on the screen, carefully composed into an expression of concern. "I just wanted to see how everything's going." "Your timing is impeccable," I said dryly. "We're just discussing the family loan Mom and Dad came to request." She had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "Oh, I didn't realize. I was just checking in. Like you checked in after my wedding, or when the acquisition was announced, or on any of my birthdays for the past 5 years. That's not fair," she protested. "I've been going through a lot with the divorce and everything. And I'm sorry about that," I said sincerely. "Divorce is painful. But our relationship has been one-sided for as long as I can remember. You call when you need something, or want to talk about your life, but you never ask about mine." My father interrupted impatiently. "This isn't productive, Caitlin. We're here to discuss a family matter, not air grievances from the past." "But that's just it," I countered. "You can't separate the two. You can't ignore someone for years and then expect them to open their checkbook because you've decided to acknowledge their existence. So you're saying you won't help us?" My father's tone had changed anger, beginning to replace the forced congeniality. "After all we've done for you." The question hung in the air, so oblivious to reality that it momentarily left me speechless. Mark stepped in, his usually gentle demeanor hardened by protective instinct. "What exactly have you done for her?" he asked quietly. "Specifically, name one significant sacrifice you've made for Caitlin in the past decade." My father stood abruptly, color rising in his face. "I don't have to justify myself to you. Caitlin is our daughter. That should be enough. Being a parent is a responsibility, not an accomplishment," I said, rising to stand beside Mark. And biology alone doesn't create obligation, especially when it's only acknowledged when convenient. So that's it, you're going to let us lose our home because you're holding on to childish resentments. My father's voice had risen, his facade of reasonableness slipping to reveal the anger beneath. While you drive around in a car that costs more than most people make in 2 years, the car is irrelevant, I replied calmly. This isn't about what I can afford to give you. It's about why I should. Because we're family, he shouted, causing my mother to flinch beside him. Family takes care of each other. Family supports those who deserve it, I quoted his own words back to him. Isn't that what you always said, usually right before explaining why Heather deserved something and I didn't? He stared at me, momentarily silenced by hearing his own philosophy turned against him. My mother rose and placed a restraining hand on his arm. Douglas, please. Let's not make this worse. On the phone screen, Heather was watching wide-eyed. Maybe we should continue this conversation another time, she suggested weakly. No, I said firmly. We're going to finish it now. I want to be absolutely clear, I won't be giving you money. Not because I can't afford it and not even because of how you've treated me in the past, though that would be reason enough. I'm saying no because giving you money wouldn't solve the real problem. And what problem is that? My father demanded, his voice dangerously quiet. That you see relationships as transactional. That you've only bothered to reconnect because you think I have something of value to you. That even now you're not interested in me as a person, only in what I can provide. That's not true, my mother protested, but there was uncertainty in her voice. Isn't it? I challenged. When was the last time either of you asked me about my life, my work, my marriage? When was the last time you called just to talk, not because you needed something? The silence that followed was answer enough. I think it's time for you to leave, Mark said quietly but firmly. Caitlin has made her decision clear. So that's it. My father's anger had returned full force. You're going to throw away your family over money, after all we've sacrificed for you. I'm not throwing away anything, I replied, my voice steady, despite the storm of emotions inside me. I'm simply acknowledging what has already been lost. And if there were ever to be a chance of rebuilding our relationship, it would need to start with honesty and mutual respect, not financial transactions. My mother was openly crying now, whether from genuine grief or frustrated manipulation, I couldn't tell anymore. Caitlin, please, we need this. We're your parents. And I needed parents who showed up for me, I replied softly. Who valued me for who I was, not what I could achieve or provide. Who made me feel as worthy of love and support as my sister. We don't always get what we need. With those words, something shifted in the room, a power dynamic that had defined our family for decades, suddenly and irrevocably altered. I was no longer the child seeking approval, no longer the daughter desperate for recognition. I was an adult standing in my truth, finally free of the need to bend myself to earn their conditional love. My father must have sensed it too because his expression changed from anger to something closer to panic. You can't just turn your back on us, he insisted. After everything we've done for you, I'm not turning my back on anyone, I said. I'm simply setting boundaries that should have been established long ago. If you want a relationship with me, it needs to be because you value me as a person, not as a financial resource. This isn't over, he threatened, as Mark opened the front door, a clear signal that their visit had concluded. Actually it is, I replied, a strange calm settling over me, at least in the way you wanted it to play out. But if you're ever interested in building a genuine relationship, one based on mutual respect, rather than what you can get from me, I'm open to that conversation. As they walked to their rental car, my father's shoulders rigid with indignation, and my mother dabbing at her tears, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: grief for the parents I had wished for but never had, relief at finally speaking my truth after years of silence, and most surprisingly, a profound sense of peace, as if a burden I had carried for decades had finally been set down. Heather was still on the video call, her expression stunned. "I can't believe you just did that," she said. "Neither can I admitted, but it needed to be done. They really are in trouble financially," she tried one last time. "And I'm genuinely sorry about that," I replied. "But their financial problems aren't the result of my choices, and solving them wouldn't fix the real issues between us." "So what happens now?" she asked, sounding suddenly young and uncertain. "That depends," I said honestly, "on whether any of you are interested in a relationship that isn't based on what you can get from me." After ending the call, I turned to Mark, suddenly exhausted from the emotional confrontation. He pulled me into a tight embrace, his strength anchoring me as the adrenaline began to fade. "I'm proud of you," he whispered against my hair. "So incredibly proud." For the first time in my life, those words came from someone who truly knew me, who had seen me at my best and worst, and loved me completely anyway. And I realized that was worth more than any approval I had ever sought from my parents. As their car disappeared down the driveway, I knew something fundamental had changed, not just in our family dynamic but within myself. I had finally stood my ground, had honored my worth, even when they could not. Whatever happened next, I would face it not as the neglected child still seeking validation, but as the woman who had finally found her voice. The house fell silent after my parents left, the absence of their presence somehow louder than the confrontation had been. Mark and I moved through the following hours in a strange suspended state, performing ordinary weekend tasks while processing the extraordinary events that had just unfolded in our living room. "Are you okay?" Mark asked as we prepared dinner that evening, the familiar domestic routine providing a welcomed anchor to normality. I considered the question carefully. "I think so. It's strange, but I feel lighter somehow. Like I've finally put down something I've been carrying for years." "You stood up for yourself," he said, squeezing my shoulder gently. "That takes courage." "I thought it'd feel more guilty," I admitted, chopping vegetables with methodical precision. "All those years of conditioning, you know, always putting their feelings before mine, always trying to earn approval that never came. I kept expecting that familiar wave of guilt to hit me after they left, but instead, I just feel released." The real emotional processing began the following day when I called Dr. Bennett for an emergency session. Sitting in her calm, neutral office, I recounted the entire visit in detail, still somewhat disbelieving that it had actually happened. "It sounds like a significant breakthrough," she observed after I finished. "How are you feeling about setting this boundary?" "Mixed," I admitted. "Part of me feels empowered, like I've finally honored my own worth. But another part is second-guessing, wondering if I was too harsh, if I should have at least helped them a little despite everything." "That's natural," she assured me. "You're navigating complex emotions and untangling years of family dynamics. The guilt you're experiencing doesn't mean you made the wrong decision. It's just evidence of how deeply ingrained these patterns are." "They made me feel like I was throwing away family over money," I said, the words still stinging. "But it wasn't about the money at all." "What was it about for you?" I thought carefully. "Respect. Recognition of our history, rather than pretending it never happened. Acknowledgement that relationships have to be built on something more than financial transactions. The fact that they came to me only when they needed something just reinforced every painful pattern from my childhood." We spent the session exploring these feelings, examining the complex mix of guilt, liberation, anger, and grief that swirled within me. Dr. Bennett helped me see that these emotions could coexist. That feeling relief didn't mean I lacked compassion, and feeling sadness didn't mean I had made the wrong choice. "Family relationships are among the most complicated we navigate," she explained. "The expectations and emotional patterns are established so early that they can feel like fundamental truths rather than learned behaviors. What you did was challenge a narrative that has defined your family for decades. That's bound to create disruption both externally and internally. in the days that followed, the aftermath of the confrontation continued to unfold. My phone filled with text messages from both parents, each taking a different approach to the same goal. My father's messages were terse and guilt-inducing. "After all we've sacrificed for you, and I never thought my own daughter would abandon us in our time of need." My mother took a softer approach. "We just miss you, and want to be part of your life again. And everyone makes mistakes, even parents." Neither acknowledged the real issues I had raised, or showed any recognition of the patterns that had led to our estrangement. Heather called 3 days after the confrontation, her voice hesitant. "They're really upset, Caitlin." "I imagine they are," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "How are you doing with all of this?" The question seemed to surprise her. Confused, I guess. "I've never heard anyone talk to them the way you did. Stand up to them like that." "It was time," I said simply. "For all our sakes, really." A pause. "Was it really that bad for you growing up? I mean, I knew they treated us differently, but..." "It wasn't just the differences in treatment," I tried to explain. "It was the constant message that I wasn't quite good enough, that I had to earn love and support that was freely given to you. And then, as adults, the complete lack of interest in my life, unless it could somehow benefit them." "I never saw it that way," she said quietly. "I just thought..." "I don't know what I thought. That you were the independent one, I guess. That you didn't need them the way I did. Everyone needs to feel valued by their parents, Heather." I just stopped expecting it after years of disappointment. The conversation marked a subtle shift in our relationship. For perhaps the first time, Heather was seeing our family dynamic from a perspective other than her own privileged position within it. I didn't expect an overnight transformation, but it felt like a small crack in the foundation of our dysfunctional family narrative. Mark's parents called shortly after hearing about what had happened, their concern and support a stark contrast to my own parents' behavior. "We want you to know that we're here for you both," Mark's mother said warmly. "Family should be about love and support, not just when it's convenient." "Thank you," I said, throat tight with emotion. "That means more than you know." "You know, Caitlin," Mark's father added thoughtfully, "sometimes the healthiest thing we can do for difficult family relationships is to set clear boundaries. It doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care enough about yourself to require respect." Their understanding brought tears to my eyes, a healing counterpoint to the manipulative messages still arriving from my parents. I also reached out to Rachel, my mentor, who had become a dear friend, seeking the perspective of someone who had known me during my formative professional years. "You did the right thing," she said firmly after I recounted the confrontation. "Love doesn't come with strings attached. Real family supports each other because they want to, not because they expect something in return." "I keep wondering if I was too harsh," I admitted. "Based on what you've told me about your relationship with them over the years, I'd say you were remarkably restrained," she replied. "Sometimes we have to speak a painful truth to create space for healing." As the days stretched into weeks, the flying monkeys began to arrive. Distant relatives and family friends, most of whom had barely spoken to me in years, suddenly found my phone number to express their concern and dismay. "Your parents are heartbroken," said my mother's cousin Ruth, who hadn't bothered to attend my wedding. "They just don't understand why you're being so cold." "Did they tell you why they came to see me after 2 years of silence?" I asked. "Did they mention missing my wedding or requesting a 6-figure loan?" "Well, no," she admitted. "But they're your parents, Caitlin. Family is family." That phrase, "family is family," became a recurring theme in these conversations, as if the biological connection alone should override any consideration of how I'd been treated. Each time I heard it, I became more certain of my decision to establish boundaries. Blood relation wasn't a blank check to be cashed at will, especially when the relationship had been so consistently one-sided. I began researching narcissistic family dynamics, finding disturbing parallels to my own experiences. The golden child and scapegoat roles that Heather and I had been assigned were textbook examples, as was my parents' current behavior, the guilt trips, the recruitment of others to apply pressure, the complete inability to acknowledge wrongdoing on their part. One night I discovered social media posts my mother had made, portraying themselves as loving parents, abandoned by an ungrateful daughter, who had forgotten where she came from once she achieved success. The narrative they were spinning bore little resemblance to reality, but it was clearly garnering sympathy from their friends and extended family. "They're rewriting history," I said to Mark, showing him the posts. "Making themselves the victims." He studied the screen with a frown. "Are you surprised?" I thought about it. "No," I admitted. "It's consistent with how they've always operated. The story is whatever serves their needs at the moment, regardless of what actually happened." After careful consideration and consultation with Dr. Bennett, I decided to send one final email to my parents, not in hopes of changing their behavior, but to ensure that my position was clearly stated, leaving no room for misinterpretation or manipulation. "I want to be clear about my boundaries going forward," I wrote. "I am not cutting you out of my life permanently, but any future relationship will need to be based on mutual respect and acknowledgement of past patterns. This means 1. No financial requests or expectations. 2. Genuine interest in my life beyond what I can provide materially. 3. Acknowledgement of how your actions have affected our relationship, including missing my wedding. 4. Respect for my right to make my own decisions without guilt or manipulation. If and when you are ready to engage on these terms, I am open to beginning a new chapter in our relationship. Until then, I wish you well, but will be limiting our contact." I didn't expect a response that addressed any of these points, and I wasn't disappointed. My father replied with a single line, "After all we've done for you, this is how you repay us." My mother didn't respond at all. Through it all, the grief was perhaps the most surprising emotion. Not grief for the relationship I was losing, but for the one I had never had. I mourned the parents who might have celebrated my accomplishments without jealousy, who might have shown up for my wedding because they wanted to share in my joy, who might have loved me for who I was, rather than what I could provide. I grieved for the childhood version of myself who had tried so hard to earn the approval that should have been freely given. "It's like losing them all over again," I explained to Dr. Bennett. "Except this time, I'm losing the fantasy that someday they'd become the parents I needed." "That's an important distinction," she noted. "You're not grieving the actual relationship, but the imagined one you hoped might someday exist." The strangest part is, I'm actually feeling stronger through all of this, I reflected. Like each manipulative text message or flying monkey phone call just confirms that I'm making the right choice. "That's because you're finally trusting your own perceptions and experiences," she explained. "You're no longer gaslighting yourself into accepting their version of reality." The investigation into my parents' social media presence revealed something else they had been telling people for years: that I had abandoned them, spinning a narrative of neglect that predated their actual estrangement by years. Posts from the time of my wedding implied that I hadn't invited them, rather than that they had chosen not to attend. Comments about my career suggested that I had forgotten them once I achieved success, rather than that they had shown no interest until they needed something. They were creating this story long before the real estrangement happened, I realized. It's like they were setting the stage for eventual victimhood. Preemptive justification, Dr. Bennett suggested. Creating a narrative that would protect their self-image regardless of how the relationship actually developed. Through these discoveries and insights, I gradually found my footing in this new reality. The guilt didn't disappear entirely, but it diminished as I recognized it as a programmed response rather than a reliable moral compass. The anger still flared occasionally, but it no longer consumed me or demanded action. The grief remained, but it became a gentle ache rather than a raw wound, a background note in an otherwise fulfilling life. Most importantly, I began to redefine family on my own terms. Mark his parents, Rachel, my close friends, the mentors and colleagues who had supported me throughout my career. These were the people who had earned a place in my heart through their actions, not through an accident of biology. They were my chosen family, bound by mutual respect and genuine care rather than obligation or expectation. As I navigated this new landscape, I found an unexpected peace in the boundaries I had established. For the first time in my life, I wasn't constantly bracing for the next disappointment or rejection. I wasn't measuring my worth by someone else's impossible standards. I was simply living authentically, surrounding myself with people who valued me for exactly who I was. "You seem different," Rachel observed over lunch one day, about 2 months after the confrontation. "More grounded somehow." I smiled, realizing she was right. "I feel different. Like I've finally stopped trying to win a game that was rigged from the start." "Freedom," she nodded. "That's what you're feeling. Freedom to be yourself without apology. Freedom." The word resonated deeply. Freedom from the endless pursuit of approval that would never come. Freedom from the weight of family expectations that had nothing to do with my happiness or well-being. Freedom to define my own worth based on my values rather than someone else's arbitrary standards. It wasn't the outcome I would have chosen as a child, dreaming of a close-knit family. It wasn't the fairy tale reconciliation that movies and books had programmed me to expect. But it was real, and it was mine, and for the first time in my life that felt like enough.